this is Gilbert Gottfried, and this is Gilbert Gottfried's amazing Colossal podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Frank Santopadre, and today we're going to be talking to an old friend of mine from the comedy club days, and I've known her for years. She's gone on to write 7 Oscar telecasts, as well as some classic TV shows that you may have heard of. We laugh about the old days, talked about everyone from Larry Raglan to Frank Sinatra, and I even got to sing a little bit. So enjoy our conversation with comic and writer Carol Leifer. Hi, this is Gilbert Gottfried, and this is Gilbert Gottfried's amazing Colossal podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Frank Santopadre. Our guest this week is a comedian, an Emmy-nominated writer of Modern Family, The Larry Sanders Show, Saturday Night Live, and a little obscure show called Seinfeld. She's also written 7 Academy Award telecasts and has worked with comedic geniuses like Larry David, Chris Rock, Gary Shandling, Steve Martin, and Gilbert Gottfried. Her career has run the gamut from emceeing at male strip clubs to opening for the legendary Frank Sinatra. Her new book is entitled How to Succeed in Business Without Really Crying: Lessons from a Life in Comedy. Let's welcome to the show our friend, the very funny Carol Leifer.
Thank you all. Thank you. Take your seats. Thank you.
Welcome, Carol.
How's it going, guys?
Good. Thanks for doing it.
Now, I think we've met once or twice, haven't we?
Oh, my God. Gilbert, do you know how far we go back? We literally go back. You know, here's what's so funny about my, reminiscences of you. Most of when I picture you, it's literally by the velvet rope at Catch a million times in the late 70s, early 80s. I always think of that's when we spent the most time together.
Yeah, it was, and what I remember, too, about those days, like in the early days of trying to get on at the clubs, was like the MC would come out and sometimes look around the room and go, oh, God, we've got a full crowd left still, and there's nobody here.
Uh-huh. But, when I think back, I didn't even, I forgot about that. Like, at the other clubs, the Improv and the Comic Strip, there were time slots. You were on at 9:50, then at 10:10, then at 10:30. Like a Catch, it was just like this free-for-all feeding frenzy. The MC would come out and it'd be like, oh, maybe you'd be next, or maybe you'd be picked 3 hours from then. I mean, it was crazy.
And what? Let's talk about some of the people hanging out in the bar with us.
Yes. Okay.
Larry David.
Right. Larry David, who you also had to be sure if you were maybe following him, you didn't even know if you were following him, you had to be sort of in the room because he could bolt off the stage at any moment from any rude, anything perceived as rude or something with the crowd that he didn't like. He would just bolt, so you had to go on next.
Yeah, it's like if someone was like biting their nails or something, it would bother him, and he'd start screaming.
Well,
at
we
them
talked to
stage.
Susie Essman, Carol, and she said that one night in the club, he was doing a joke about a bungalow, and somebody said, "What's a bungalow?" and he walked off the stage.
That is exactly the kind of thing that would have irked Larry. Exactly.
And of course, another unknown comic, Jerry Seinfeld, used to be.
Yes, although I don't remember him being around Catch a Rising Star that much. He was such a comic strip act and identified with that club and really ran the place. I mean, I think what's so funny about, having a long show business career like we all have is that, when I started at the comic strip, when I passed the audition with Paul Reiser and Rich Hall the same night in 1977,
wow.
and Jerry was the MC, you know, he was already a star there. I mean, he'd only been doing it a year longer than us, but he was already like an MC, which was like a big deal, and could pass people on the auditions. You know, he was really this big macher, you know, only doing it for a year. But, yeah, he wasn't really at Catch as much as the other people that we know. Like, Rita Rudner was also hanging around then, too.
And I remember with the comic strip, he had such control over that place that every single comic at the comic strip their delivery would be like this.
Was he bothered by your impression? You've alluded to that in the past.
Because I used to like listen sometimes just through the wall. You could hear it, and I wouldn't even see who was on, but I'd hear. But
did Jerry ever
You've
find
done that impression? Did you ever do that on? Well, I'm trying to think. You've done your Jerry impression places, right?
Oh,
it's
yes.
so spot on.
One time on Howard Stern, we called up his answering machine, and I spoke as his long-lost son for about an hour until he ran out of time.
Oh, my God.
Who else was in the clubs in those days? Who else was sitting around with Larry and Jerry and who were the names that people might not be household names?
Who? You mean the people who weren't
like
who were big then?
Yeah, like Gilbert talked about Larry Raglan for about an hour with Bob Saget.
Yes, Larry Raglan was he was a very big, entertainer. I mean, like, that was great about performing in nightclubs like we did. It wasn't just a comedy club. It was, singers, and Larry was a singing impressionist. And as Gilbert knows, we all have our tricks of what makes people respond and, get big, audience reaction. And he went up and sang and did all these.
And before anyone forgets, I won't do the entire thing, but today I thought I saw a dummy in the window. But it was you.
What is the dummy in the window song? Did anybody ever figure out what that meant or what it was about? Was it only known to him?
Bob Saget was on this show, and he demanded I sing the entire song, which I did. I heard it so many times.
And it would kill every single time, right?
Why?
But you know what?
Oh, go ahead.
The other thing about, people entertaining at the club was that, Pat Benatar was discovered at Catch a Rising Star, and I have this amazing memory of, going online, going in line on a Monday afternoon to get my number to go on that night at Catch a Rising Star. And I remember while we were all sitting there in the hot sun waiting, to get our number, Pat Benatar breezed into the club because she already was, somebody with a name and really on her way to becoming famous. And she just turned to the line and she said, "Hang in there, guys. It really works."
Wow.
Like the whole system, like, it worked for me, so I know it can work for, well, maybe one or two of you, but it was like, this whole kind of assembly line of trying to become a comedian and be an entertainer. But I think that was interesting time too, because I think, as we all know too, it was really good to follow a singer, because they kind of got the audience up and in a good place, and you didn't have to compete with anybody else's kind of comedic energy, or if it matched yours or not,
And I remember Pat back then. Pat Benatar was like, this cute little lounge singer. She was buttoned down and very conservative.
And Rick Newman wound up managing her for a while.
Yeah.
I think after that, yeah.
Yeah, for a really, really long time. I mean, she just, took off. But then, remember, Joni.
There was Joni Peltz?
Joni Pelt, right. She used to sing "Don't Rain on My Parade," and, but it was really, she was like somebody who you just, she captivated the audience. You really just thought, it was exciting because you were always thinking this person could be the next big thing,
Every single singer back then and every single club would sing, everyone has its season, everyone has its time.
It was the time of those kind of songs. Don't cry out loud.
A little Melissa Manchester.
And I remember there was one singer who would only appear at Catch, and I think named Bill Maru.
What was her name?
Bill Maru.
Oh, Bill. Okay.
He became big. But he used to sing, "Make me laugh and make me cry, make me live until I die. That's the way, baby, tenderly. Let me love you forever. I'm so happy that there is someone who'll give me love in return. Ba 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 ba.
Oh, God.
I don't remember that guy. Did he really, sing the entire song and people liked it?
Yeah, and that was the middle section. Ba 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 ba.
Oh my God!
Carol,
what about?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Lenny
Schultz.
Oh, Lenny Schultz. Well, I know him. Yeah.
Yeah, who used to just be like nuts, and he'd
crazy.
Didn't he wear a chicken suit? Lenny
Oh,
Schultz?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And what didn't people in the audience yell out, "Go crazy, Lenny"?
Oh, yes. And I think one time he told me he used to travel with a midget, and one time he picked the midget up and held him upside down and jerked him off on stage.
Great. It's ahead of his time.
Oh my God! Well, I would have paid to see that. I mean, come on.
So, Carol, tell us about how you started doing it the first time. How you started? Because I think, Gilbert, you started at 15.
Yeah.
So by the time Carol took the stage for the first time, you'd already been at it.
Yeah, I was already Georgie Jessel.
Well, I didn't know anything about these clubs, these nightclubs, because I was just this college student, and I went to school with Paul Reiser in upstate New York in Binghamton, and Paul was another city person who knew about these clubs, and he was doing it in high school because he went to Stuyvesant, and when we went to college, he was like, "Oh, I like to go to this nightclub, and I like to go on, during the summer, and these are." There weren't comedy clubs that are like, who's this guy who goes on in nightclubs? Like, who's this Vic Damone? Like, he just, shows up at nightclubs. Like, what is this? And then I went and I watched him at Catch. And, Paul is such a natural, right? From the beginning, he was so good at it. And I saw this kind of world of people who like, oh, wow, you want to be a comedian? Well, get a number and go on and you're a comedian. And that, I always tease Paul that if I never met him, I don't know if I would have found that exact route to performing and being a comedian. But it's what I've always loved about stand-up comedy, and continue to that. Like, it's not complicated. It's not like if you want to be an actor, you got to get an agent, you got to go to classes, and you got, it's like, we're all like, I think also impatient people, and I like this, this immediate route to doing what you wanted to do. And as, we all know, you only get good at doing this by doing it 3 million times,
That's what's so weird about it now, because I always think what got me into the business and what kept me there in those early years was out-and-out stupidity. you didn't realize the amount of work and your chance of making it was 1 in a zillion.
Right. Now, Gilbert, I don't even know how did you hear as a 15-year-old about these nightclubs. And was the first one Catch?
Yeah, I'm curious myself.
Yeah, Catch hadn't opened yet.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
It's 1942.
Yeah, there was like a Chinese laundry there or something.
He did stand up on the GI Bill.
I was this kid who would I would do imitations of actors I saw on TV, and I was joking around and stuff. And finally, someone said to my sister, there's this place, The Bitter End, where they have open mic night. They called it Hootenanny Night.
Yeah, right.
And I went there with my two older sisters on the train, and I just put my name down on the list and then went on, did mainly imitations.
So
Oh my God! As a 15-year-old.
Yeah.
You didn't really have a comedy act.
No, and I was doing Humphrey Bogart and Boris Karloff, showing that even then my act was really dated. So, and it hasn't gotten any more relevant since then.
So wait a minute, how did they introduce you? Like, here's a kid who wants to come on. Like, come on, kid, or was?
Yeah, pretty much. They would just see the name and they go, "Okay, our next performer is so and so."
Right.
And then I'd go out and so it was at The Bitter End.
Wow. And how did it go over the first time that you went on?
Another thing, I think I always say it, but it's true. I don't know if I did well or if I was too stupid to know I bombed. But maybe I was in that much of a daze. So I would do it again after that.
Right. It's so funny because the first time I went on a Catch, I had like the perfect spot. Like David Say was the MC, and I went on fifth. I still remember that. And I think I had followed somebody who bombed, which was always great because it's like it's only going to be better than somebody bombing.
Yes.
And I went on, and I had a pretty practiced 5 minutes, and it killed. And then I just came off stage, and I said to Paul, I just thought, wow, okay, so I guess I'll be on the Tonight Show a week from now. Didn't realize the next time I went on, I ate it, and it was horrible, and people were heckling me, and it was like, oh, it's not at all like this first perfect time.
It's so funny that way because I know with me it was the same thing. I'd go on stage, do a great set, and then that's it. I'm taking over for Charlie Chaplin as the legendary comedian, and then I go on the next night and completely bomb.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you remember your first joke, Carol? Was it with the Trident gum joke? Was one of your first jokes?
Yes, I had a joke about another one. Another commercial that's nobody would remember now. But Trident gum. They say that 4 out of 5 dentists surveyed recommend sugarless gum. Who's this fifth guy? What's he recommending? Rock candy and jujubes, or I had always different, maple, gargle with maple syrup or whatever, but when I have my first 5 minutes on tape, which is really outrageous, but I still have that tape. Yeah. And, I listen to it now like it's my daughter doing stand up, but, we know from, years of watching audition night, if you have something that's pretty practiced and has, 1 or 2 okay jokes, the audience would always be with them because they're always rooting for someone who was halfway sane, and wasn't like a crazy person off the street who came up, and got on audition night. So I always got good feedback right away, as I'm sure you did too, Gilbert, right?
Well, sometimes I got great feedback. Other times the audience would scream at me and get the jackets on.
I think the first time I saw you, Carol, you were doing a bit about Bobby Goldsboro and Richard Harris singing MacArthur Park.
Yes. I did a lot of musical takeoff things like that. The thing that was so great for me about stand-up right away was that it was like you could take things that you were telling your friends were funny things and put them on stage, and it's like, oh, and this is what kind of makes up your act. Okay, so I always tell people who are thinking about going into comedy, like, it really should be in your wheelhouse already. This shouldn't be something that you have to really work so hard at that it's something you want to try to make a living at. Like, it really needs to be second nature to do this kind of stuff, because it really was that kind of thing. And, to watch Paul put his act together at the same time. I mean, I'm really impressed, Gilbert, that, well, your sisters brought you, but that you kind of went out on your own with this at such a young age. I always say to people, like, I don't know if I had been alone, if I would have ever had the courage to go to these clubs without, Paul as my friend there, experiencing this with me.
Now, was Paul ever more than just a friend with you?
Yes, I dated Paul. Yes, he was my college boyfriend.
Should say that like Cloris Leachman in Young Frankenstein.
He was my boyfriend.
There we go. Now, you came from a funny family, Carol. I mean, to talk a little bit in the book is touching to read
Can
about.
you describe Paul Reiser in bed?
Oh, God. He's off the...
Did he go?
He's off the track.
Oh, that's good. That's, oh, yes, grab my balls.
Your Seinfeld is much better than your Reiser.
I could never quite get the Reiser down.
I would think he is not easy to get.
He's got that thing going there.
I've never seen anyone do Paul Reiser.
Yeah,
it's tough.
It's a tough one.
No. Yeah, but I grew up. My parents were comedy freaks. Really, my dad was, because he really had wanted to be a comedian. And so when I grew up, and I think it's really kind of what's sad about kids growing up today is, when I grew up, you were captive to your parents' record player, So I know every word to Fiddler on the Roof as a result, but also to, comedy albums. Like, my parents played that 2,000-Year-Old Man, Carl Reiner, Mel Brooks album, till it probably was scratched out and we had to get another copy at Corvettes,
Corvettes.
I had a really good comedy education in the house because they listened to that. They listened to Vaughn Meader, the First Family album.
Sure.
My dad had these Mickey Katz records, who's Joel Gray's father, who was in vaudeville.
Sure.
And
you got to work with Jennifer later, and it's like
I did.
Yeah.
Boy, Frank, you're on everything. Oh, my God.
And Mickey would sing, "How much is that pickle in the window?" That was
sure.
It's one of, "How much is that pickle in the window?"
Didn't he have a Davy Crockett? Didn't he parody the famous Davy Crockett song, too? The King of
that's
the
right. That's the one
David
we
Crockett.
had.
Yeah. I listened to Mickey Katz and Alan Sherman. I wasn't even Jewish.
Yeah, Alan Sherman was, giant, really, really, at the time.
Yeah, his was Hello Mudda, Hello Fada.
My son, the folk singer.
But I think we really grew up in a fantastic time because of that, because now, having a kid of my own, he's not captive at all to what I'm playing in the house. He listens, he's got his own headphones. He listens to whatever he wants, and I think especially if you grew up with parents, with good taste, I look back now and I feel really lucky that I was held captive to their, whatever they played in the house.
I remember, like, back then, TV had, like, 3 stations, and it's like you'd watch these shows, and, you had to watch what was on.
Right.
And it's like, so you'd watch a variety show, and in order to see, like, maybe the rock group or ventriloquist, you had to sit through the other stuff. And you realized that a lot of times the other stuff wasn't that bad.
No.
And
you actually enjoyed it and learned stuff.
Mm-hmm. And because look at all the great comedians that were on Ed Sullivan, and you had to sit through, the guys in tights doing their acrobatic stuff from Poland,
And there used to be so many old movies on TV. Back then they weren't even that old. That's the funny thing.
The $1 Million Movie.
Yes.
Right. And I still remember, the theme song from Channel 7. To listen to that, right?
Oh, sure. With the guy in the director in the chair spinning around in the shot.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
the 4:30 movie.
With the late night movie was da 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 da.
The syncopated clock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Channel 7 movie of the week, which I found out years later was a Burt Bacharach score.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, was
wow.
Dun 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 da 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 da.
Very good. And the $1 million movie, I think, was Tara's theme from Gone with the Wind.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, and one of the
This is what we obsess about on the show every week.
There was a news station that used to use the
Cool Hand Luke.
Cool
Are you
Hand
thinking of
Luke
that?
thing.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, very good.
I remember I saw that Cool Hand Luke once, and I was like, I can't believe they stole the Channel 7 news theme.
Now we worked together, among other things, on a TV show.
Oh my God, that's right, The Toast of Manhattan.
Yes, which I remember. Yes. I remember the song. Do you remember the song to The Toast of Manhattan? Okay.
Please regale me.
Okay. You don't have to ask. It's the toast of Manhattan, the toast of Manhattan. So this must be Sunday. The toast of Manhattan, the toast of Manhattan. And here's our own Freddie. Every Sunday, with lots and lots of variety. It's the toast of Manhattan.
You remember the theme song from
Yes,
it was an unaired pilot? Did it air?
That is outrageous that you remember that. Now, wait a second. I remember because it was, I'm like Rain Man with dates. I remember it was the spring of 1982. And so I was already living out in California. Did they fly you out to be in the Toast of Manhattan, Gilbert?
They flew me, Paul Reiser, out, and they... I think we were all staying at like some housing development.
Bob Nelson.
It was Oakwood.
Yeah,
I remember
Nelson,
that.
Yeah.
Yep.
And yes. And and I remember too, I was playing a character on this show who was like some showbiz manager, and they said, "Well, how do you see him?" And I said, "Well, he's kind of a middle-aged guy." And then the producers and makeup men got together, and this middle-aged guy became like a scene out of The Mummy.
Yeah, I remember that. They put a bald wig on you. I remember that.
And all these, all those like glue-on like prosthesis.
Right,
cheeks
yes.
And chin and neck and.
What was the premise?
And the funny glasses.
Oh yeah, and it was like I would have to come in like 3 hours before everyone else.
Yeah.
Now, Carol, in your book, you say that you went right up to Barry Levinson and you told him that you loved him in High Anxiety, and he was flattered. And do you think that helped you get the part?
Yes, I do. Many of the things that I cover, Frank, in my book called How to Succeed in Business Without Really Crying.
I'm holding it up.
I really do think that so much of, when you're a true fan of comedy like I am, I think it always helps to share your enthusiasm with people because people are people, and now I've been in the business so long, I've been on the other side where people have auditioned for me, and when you tell someone that you really like them in a very small, minimal, nothing part in a movie, and you can recite their lines and all that kind of thing, it definitely has an effect on them,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how can it not when you're a fan like that? So one of my things that I try to tell, I'm really getting fantastic feedback from very young people about my book, and I'm really flattered because I really do share a lot of these kind of things that I think along the way help you if you want to have not only a career in show business but in anything. And something like that is like, tell people when you like them and stuff, it's like, don't be afraid to do that kind of thing. Who doesn't love that,
And it's funny when you
Sure.
mentioned sitting on the other side of the auditioning process. And the times I've done that and watched people audition, you get a different perspective because when you're auditioning, you just think the other people there are scumbags making your life difficult.
Right, exactly. I know. And when you're on the other side, you really see that the thing that always really sells someone to you is when they don't give a shit, when they show up and they do their work, and it's not that kind of desperation that I know that I always, would bring into most auditions, like, this anxiety and like, oh God, I really want to get this, and you find that the people who audition and kind of have it, roll off their back. I talk in my book actually about, working at Seinfeld and Bryan Cranston coming in to audition. He played Tim Watley.
Oh, the dentist.
The dentist on Seinfeld. And, he was such a go-to comedy guy, which is amazing when you think about how talented he is, that he can also play such a dramatic actor so well. But, he would come in and he would know his stuff and he would show up and do it great. And he would leave like, it wasn't that kind of thing with me auditioning where the second I leave, I'm calling my agent like, do you get any feedback? Do you get any feedback?
Yes.
Do you know the thing? Just people who do their work and can let it go,
And what I remember, too, watching people audition, and I should really talk, but it's like sometimes a person would walk in and go, oh, hello, I'm, Joe Smith. I'm going to be auditioning for the part of so-and-so. And you'd go, oh, I like this guy. He seems like a nice guy. And then when they would act, in quotes.
Yes.
And it's like, that's when they lose all their warmth and everything that you ever liked about them would stop.
Yeah.
I love that you went up to Barry Levinson and just told him that you were a fan of something that he wasn't really known for. I mean, it was a small part. He was a writer on the Carol Burnett show, and he wrote Injustice for All, which I don't think a lot of people know, the Pacino movie. With with Valerie Curtin,
with Jack Warden.
But he's in High Anxiety. He has this wonderful cameo as the bellhop that stabs Mel Brooks with the rolled up newspaper. So I think we forget too that those people that we're talking to are also fans who have probably wanted to do that in their careers to other people.
And Barry Levinson used to be in a comedy team with Craig T. Nelson and Rudy DeLuca.
Rudy DeLuca, who's still around. Who's also in High Anxiety as the guy with the assassin with the metal teeth.
Yeah.
And Craig was in our pilot, The Toast in Manhattan, as an actor, and Rudy was one of the producers.
Yes.
But that's so funny what you were saying about auditioning. The other thing, too, like that desperation kind of bleeding through, when I've been on the other side and the people have auditioned and then they audition and they go, would you like to see it another way? It's like, how about outside?
Yeah.
I have to tell
How about you do it out there?
I have to tell just a quick story that I'm inspired by what you're saying, Carol. And I wasn't in the sitcom business very long. I was staffed on a show in L.A. called Lost on Earth that was completely forgettable, except John O'Hurley was on it, Peterman from Seinfeld, and Stacey Galena was on it, who you worked with on All Right Already.
Exactly,
and
yes.
I wrote an episode with my writing partner, and we actually had to sit in on casting, and a gentleman came in. He was an older actor, and he walked into the room, and I jumped up, and I said, oh, Ralph Manza. Now, he was because I'm an idiot savant for this stuff, but he was an obscure character actor that I had recognized from an old episode of Batman from the 60s. And I made this guy's day. He told me nobody had ever recognized him by name in an audition. I mean, that's kind of what I liked about living in L.A. You would recognize these people and get to make their day by mentioning their names. Told me he ran home to his wife. He stayed in touch with me for months.
My God.
Because he said I was the only person that ever recognized him on hundreds of auditions and ever actually bothered to know his name. So it made me feel good.
John Hurley, who was
John O'Hurley.
John O'Hurley, who was Mr. Peterson.
Mr. Peterman.
Right.
Peterman.
He played Mr.
Peterman.
He was on our show, short-lived.
And I remember I was on an episode of a USA show called Silk Stockings, where we had to
Charlie Brill was on that.
Yes,
Steve McCall's husband.
And we had to track down a killer, of course, who is, for some reason, of course, in a strip club. And we wind up, I'm like fighting with John O'Hurley in the mud wrestling pit.
A very nice man, by the way.
And then we showered together. So me and John O'Hurley, Mr. Peterman, saw each other's dicks.
What? Oh. Well,
Well, that brings
look
us
at that. Now we've landed on something.
See?
But, it can work the other way in recognizing someone,
You mean,
okay?
you mean you cannot see someone's dick? Yeah. I'm sorry.
I've moved on from the dick. Okay, so I remember...
I just got that. Okay.
I was shopping on 8th Street in the Village once. I still use this luggage called Le Sport Sack, okay? So I walk into the Le Sport Sack store, and this guy is helping me, and he's very nice, but he's very kind of like, manly man, like very kind of hairy and kind of, he's helping me, and I'm like, I know this guy from somewhere. Like, I know him, and then it kind of finally hits me, and I say to him in the sports sex store, I said, wait a second, were you in Quest for Fire?
He's really hairy.
And thank God it was Ron Perlman, the guy who...
Sure.
But if you say to someone, were you in Quest for Fire? And the answer is no, I wasn't. That's a very bad question to ask.
That's hilarious.
I heard that actor Luis Guzman.
Oh, Luis Guzman from he's in all the Paul Thomas Anderson
He
movies.
said when they were showing those cavemen commercials, people used to come up to him all the time and go, "Hey, I love your new commercial."
Oh my God. Carol, this is a perfect segue since we're talking about character actors.
But what happened? I have to go to the bathroom. Can I pee and come right back?
We'll pause
I swear,
it.
I cannot hold it
Anymore.
it.
We'll pause it and edit it out.
All right. Okay, I'll be back in 1 minute.
You bet.
Okay, hold on. Okay, I'm back.
Okay, now this shows our ages here, because when we were getting ready to call you on the podcast, I said, "Hey, wait, I got to go pee first," and I ran and peed, and then we were talking to you, and Frank said, "Oh, I have to pee," and now in the middle of the interview, you have to pee, proving that none of us are kids.
Exactly. Which leads me to your first sponsorship should definitely be either Flomax or catheters.
Do you know, Carol, that the first sponsor that approached us when we launched the show was Squatty Potty?
Yeah, it was basically a plastic box.
I kid you not.
That you put your feet up on, that lifts your legs, that makes taking a shit easier, allegedly.
I know all about it
Scientifically.
because, as a huge Howard Stern fan, he raves about it, and then they became a sponsor, and I'm sure they're doing so incredibly well because of Howard's endorsement, which also leads me to, I think the funniest thing I always laugh, Gilbert, that they play on the Stern Show constantly is when you do your rabbi with the fake Hebrew. I swear to God, I lose it.
That should be the B-side of Dummy in the Window. Carol, because we were talking about character actors, and we'll move it along. Tell us real quickly the Harry Dean Stanton story from the book, which is wonderful.
Oh my God! All right. Well, along the lines of telling people that you are a fan of, that you like their work, complimenting their work because you're a true fan. I'm also a big proponent of, being social and so many things have happened over my career really because of a connection, meeting someone at a party or some other thing. It's always good to be out and about, even if it's not naturally in your DNA to be social like that. I really think you have to kind of develop that skill, absolutely, to be in show business. So my partner, Lori, we're skipping over a whole thing from my college boyfriend to my partner, Lori. But
now we'll come back.
Now, by partner, this means someone you do who's on first base.
Yes, she's my law firm partner. We have a law firm together.
Oh, I thought it was more like Bud Abbott when you say your partner.
Right. Yes, she's my comedy partner, and she's kind of really the straight man, and I'm really the fall down, the clown, But anyway, so my Harry Dean Stanton story. So anyway, she is always saying to me, pushing me, say hello to that person. Oh, there's so-and-so. Go over and say hello. And wonderful things have happened as a result of that momentary thing of like, oh, I don't want to go over. And then you go over and it's, fine. So we're at the Paul Simon concert at the Staples Center in L.A. And I have great seats as a result of being with CAA at the time. I mean, I have to really say, if you can ever be with a big agent, do it just for the perks of tickets that you can get. And anyway, we're sitting there, and Lori's like, hey, turn around, like a few rows behind us. She goes, there's Harry Dean Stanton. And I was like, oh, my God. And I turn around, and it's Harry Dean Stanton sitting there with Jack Nicholson. And I'm like, oh, my God. And Lori says, go over and say hello. And I'm like, what? She goes, remember you had dinner with him? And it's like, oh, my God, that's right. We had gone to the Palm restaurant because Richard Belzer had invited, he's very good friends with Harry Dean Stanton, and he invited Jim Vallely and Jonathan Schmock and Dom Irera and a bunch of comics to eat with Harry Dean. And so, we had gone to the Palm and we had dinner, and it was it was like not even just a dinner. It was like a 3-hour adventure and drinking, and in the middle of the dinner, people started chanting Mommy, because my comedy friends over the years have started to call me as a nickname Mommy, so we were chanting Mommy and, drinking and having a great time. And Lori was like, oh, go over and say hello. So I muster up the courage, and I walk over, and I say, excuse me, Harry Dean, how are you? Remember me? It's Carol Leifer. And he just turns to me and very not in a welcoming way shakes his head, no. Like, no, I don't know you. So then I tried, and I wasn't crazy about this, I tried to kind of jog. Because remember, I said, remember we had dinner recently at the Palm. It was, Richard Belzer invited me, and it was all these comedy guys, and he just turns to me, and he's another really curt and not friendly no. So, and Jack Nicholson, by the way, at this point, is just like a sphinx. He has the sunglasses on. He's not even acknowledging that I'm speaking to Harry Dean, who's sitting right next to him. So then I get really desperate because I couldn't turn around and just leave then. I'm kind of, recounting the entire dinner, like almost to the point of talking about the different breads that were in the bread basket on the table at the Palm. Nothing is happening. I'm going, remember, people are shouting, Mommy, Mommy, and there's nothing. He's not turning anything. So finally I had to accept defeat because this is getting ridiculous with the hole I was digging that became even bigger by every passing second. So I just kind of wrap it up by going, well, anyway, Harry Dean just thought I'd come over and say hello. So then I do the 180, turning around, the walk of shame. Lori's head is bowed down because she could see that this did not go well. And as I'm walking back 100 yards later in the Staples Center, I hear Harry Dean go, I remember now. And I waved to him 100 yards away, and that was it.
What a character he is.
I remember doing a movie called Jack and the Beanstalk, and in it was Christopher Lloyd, who I've been doing voice work with all these years on Cyber Chase. And
wait a minute, which Christopher Lloyd? The director, Spinal Tap, or the?
Oh no, Freddie
Reverend
actor.
Jim. Back to the Future.
Yeah, Back to the Future and Taxi.
Right. Sorry, I'm thinking of Chris Lloyd, the comedy.
So
writer.
we were the two main voices on Cyber Chase for years, and then the other person in the movie was Katie Sagal from Married with Children, who I was squeezed into a life raft with in that episode. And so I was happy to see the two of them, and I went over to the two of them. Neither one of them, I mean, you'd think I wandered in off the street.
You're not the only one, Carol.
Right. But is that like the worst moment ever where you go over and you expect a somewhat, even just a polite reception if they don't remember you of, oh, hi, how are you? Okay, and then, whatever. And it's like no, I don't know.
No, yes. I remember.
Can you leave?
I was expecting at least even a smirk of acknowledgement. Not a hug or anything, but even just like, oh, like that, like a phony smile.
Yeah. But nothing. Yeah. No, it's hard. It's hard to brave that.
Carol, we'll get to Seinfeld as soon as we can, but let's talk real quickly about Saturday Night Live, because neither you or Gilbert had a particularly memorable experience on that show.
Yes.
You were there for one season, the Lauren's first season back in '85?
It was Lauren's first season back after Dick Ebersol, handed over the reins again to Lauren. And people are always like, what year did you work in? I always kind of call it the weird year because it had the strangest cast ever with, Randy Quaid and Robert Downey Jr. and Joan Cusack and Lovitz and Dennis Miller, Terry Sweeney. It was just, really.
The guy from Breakfast Club.
Anthony Michael Hall.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it was such, what I remember so clearly about it, too, is that, at the end of the season, SNL is this institution and 40 years and all of that. And, that at the end of that year, the show almost got canceled. It was that poorly received, So it was really, I'm sure, like you, Gilbert, I feel like I would never trade my year there for anything. I mean, because it is, to have worked on this show, I still, cherish having gotten the opportunity, even though it was not an easy gig for me. But, it's really wild to look back on, especially, when I think back of thinking of writing, because I saw, A. Whitney Brown when I was back at the 40th reunion and stuff, and people smoking in the offices, and not having computers to write your sketches on. You'd write them in longhand on a yellow legal pad and hand it over to someone to write it up for you. I mean, it's just wild.
And it's so funny because for years I felt like this sense of shame, like people knew me from this horrible. But after a while, they totally forget and they get it mixed up, like cavemen and dinosaurs together,
Or Luis Guzman and
Oh,
Cavemen.
yes.
What were you, 11 episodes?
Yeah, that was pretty much it. And what's funny is I went to the Saturday Night Live 40th celebration.
Yes, I saw you there, yes.
And what was interesting, it was the first time I ever met Lorne Michaels. And he shook my hand, and I was kind of surprised that he was shaking my hand. He said, well, you're a brick in this wall.
Oh, that's kind of nice.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really amazing. I mean, I remember when you got SNL. That was really wild to, have scored that gig, especially because, Gilbert, we really got to think about. They didn't cast a lot of stand-ups. I mean, they put you and Eddie in the cast, in Piscopo too, but then they kind of got rid of the stand-ups, and they didn't kind of really come back until Dana Carvey in that year,
Yeah, it was a very and with me, what was so awful, it was kind of like if in the middle of Beatlemania they got rid of John, Paul, George, and Ringo and brought in 4 other schmucks. They hated us from the start.
They did. They did. But it was great at the 40th to see, and I should have taken a picture of it when you and Eddie and Tim Kazurinsky were all together and kind of hugging each other. It was really, really nice because you could really see as an outsider that, when you share, an experience like that, you really are kind of bonded in a way with someone that nobody else knows about. And you could see it all these years later, how when you guys were together, how familiar it was.
And you see people you didn't work with, and you still have that connection.
So it's all a fraternity that you're all in, really.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Did you get anything on, Carol? I know you had a rough year. Did you get any sketches on?
You know what, Frank? It's really wild to look back now because I did this, they did a video shoot with a few of the writers, and I did it with Sarah Silverman and a bunch of other people. And Sarah was saying, she really only had like one sketch on that she got on, and, other writers like Larry David, who said he never got anything on. Like,
amazing.
I really got a bunch of stuff on, like things that I wrote with other people, like that Black Girl.
Was that with Denitra Vance?
Of that girl, yeah, with Denitra Vance.
Yeah, I remember that. The late Denitra Vance.
I got a sketch on with Tom Hanks and one with Angelica Houston and Dudley Moore. And I look back now, it's like, I can't believe I got fired. Like, I got a lot of shit on. I don't get it.
and let's see all the people, like I was fired from Saturday Night Live, but the other people, like Sarah Silverman.
David Tell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and Norm Macdonald.
Larry David.
Sure.
Damon Wayans.
Damon Wayans.
Yep. Lots of
right.
good people.
Oh, I was there that year when he got fired, too.
Because I think he got mad and he was doing some sketch as a cop and he, for no reason at all, played it as gay.
Yes. Yeah, it wasn't really a good thing to do. If you were looking to get fired, that was the kind of thing one would actually find in the handbook of how to get fired.
So you're a writer on a show. It's an iconic show. It's a kind of an up and down year. You get a lot of stuff on, but oddly enough, you're let go. And then you go back to stand-up, Carol?
And then I went back to stand-up, yeah. And actually that was I wasn't too upset about not going back to SNL because, when you're on the outs there, when you're kind of not in the main club of whatever year you're there, it's a little bit of a relief because, when you're in with the in crowd, it's great, but when you're not, you really want to get as far away from there as you can. So it was a good time for me to concentrate on doing stand-up then, and but I'm still, going back to the 40th, and I'm really proud of the writers that I came up with because, George Meyer was a writer when I was there.
Terrific writer.
Who's terrific, who's, done so much Simpsons and great work, and John Swartzwelder and Jack Handy and Don Novello. And, I always tease him because Robert Smigel was they called it an apprentice writer that year. And I would always tease him that that meant that he needed to wear goggles, safety goggles, whenever he was in the writer's room. But, to come up, and, the guys from Kids in the Hall were
Bruce
writers
was there,
my year.
Yeah, Bruce McCullough.
So it was really amazing to really work with that caliber of people that early in my career.
I just worked with Schmeigel recently on that night of Too Many Stars.
Oh, right. Was that last night? Did that air?
Yeah. And he was there, and his puppet was there.
We have to get Robert on the show.
Triumph the dog.
So, Carol, you went back to stand up, and help us with the chronology. When did Larry and Jerry call?
That was in '93, so that was a few years later. I got the luckiest break of my life in that Seinfeld, when Larry and Jerry were hiring writers for the show, they never wanted anybody who had written on sitcoms before. They really wanted people who had never done it, because as far as Larry was concerned, if you'd written sitcoms already, you were kind of corrupted by the system and, had a lot of bad rules and guidebooks in your head. So they asked me to, come on the writing staff of Seinfeld. It was amazing because it was also kind of right on the cusp, too, of it becoming super successful. So it wasn't, it was an amazing, amazing opportunity, but the show was still kind of finding its legs. It wasn't the blockbuster yet that it became probably 2 years later. So, it was amazing.
Was season 5 when you came on?
Yes.
It's funny to look at the early Seinfeld shows.
The Seinfeld Chronicles.
Yeah.
At the very beginning.
And you see that the characters weren't down yet.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think what is so brilliant about the show, and, everything to do with the show came from Larry and Jerry. I mean, they were really, the crux of every episode and every script, every script that people see on the air went through their, they did a draft of every script. But I think what's amazing when you look back on it now is, even at the beginning when I wasn't there, but the beginning where the ratings were not good at all, I mean, the show would have been gone if it aired now. They wouldn't give it the time to breathe and grow like they did back then, just because they did. It would never happen now. So it really is kind of a comet to me in that way, because I don't think it could even have existed now.
And I remember what was so funny is, like, knowing Larry from the clubs is when I'd watch Seinfeld and I'd go, oh, I remember him talking about that happening to him.
Yeah. Right, like talking about at SNL when he couldn't take it anymore as a writer and left a message on Dick Ebersol's answering machine, saying that he telling him he wanted to quit, and then going in on Monday and just trying to ignore that he had quit on Friday.
Yeah, he had thought about it.
That's great.
He was a big shot, and he told him off, and he said, I'll never work with you again. Then he thought, oh, my God, I have a job. I can walk to work. And
that became an episode where George does the same thing.
Right. Yes.
And I remember there was an episode that got changed to Elaine, but where Elaine has a boyfriend she can't stand from out of town, and she has to get him to the airport, and the alarm didn't go off, so she rushes him out and speeds her car to the airport to get rid of him. And I remember Larry one time talking to him and goes, one time I was with this girl and I had enough. And she was leaving the next day, and I had to drive her to the airport, and the alarm didn't come off. And so I was saying, hurry, let's you'll pack in the car.
They encouraged all of you guys, all the writers, to draw from your own lives, and as you did with your classic episodes.
Well, it really was a great lesson in learning how to, be in your life, but also always one step out of your life to try to see the funny situations and, make them comedy, because, Larry and Jerry were so good at that, of just using real things. I mean, I knew if I went into pitch that if it was something that had happened in real life, and I could point to it as a real story, it definitely had a leg up,
Now, how was it getting stuff submitted there compared to Saturday Night Live?
Well, it was really different because, as you know, Gilbert, from SNL, so much of whether your sketch gets on is determined at the read-through, where everybody writes their sketches, and then Wednesday afternoon, all of the cast is around a giant table with Lauren and whoever the guest host is, and then all the sketches are read aloud, and whatever really works there usually gets on or has a good shot of getting on. And if you read a sketch and it dies, it probably won't, be on that week. So much of it had to do with the read-through, as opposed to Seinfeld. We didn't have a classic writer's room per se, like on other sitcoms I've worked on. Seinfeld, it was really you going into Larry and Jerry's office, setting a time to pitch your stories. It had to be one or two sentences, pretty, concise, that would make them laugh right away. And
we should say that their
easy.
desks faced each other. They were in the same office.
Yes, their desks faced each other, and a lot of times I would go in and it was definitely intimidating, and I'd pitch stuff, and if Larry was impatient or unhappy, he'd kind of say, I don't know, I could hear that idea on another show. That was like a big put down. I could see that on another sitcom or whatever, but if you said something like Elaine thinks the Korean manicurists are talking about her behind her back in Korean, that would be something that he'd leap out of his seat and go, yes, we're doing that. That's a show. That's a show.
One.
And that kind of thing that happened to me in New York all the time. So those are the kind of things, or saying George brings a deaf woman with him to a party to lip read his ex-girlfriend's lips from across the room to find out why she broke up with him. That was right in his wheelhouse, Jerry's wheelhouse. Yes, that's it. We're doing that, And then you knew that you were kind of on your way to developing a script for the show. So it was really, where SNL was really down to the table read of these kind of things. Seinfeld was all about if Larry and Jerry signed off on an idea that you had, then you knew you could go off and start to write your script, But if you didn't have that, if you didn't have the funny idea right away, you were never going to get a script,
And was it the lip reader, the episode where Elaine pretends she's deaf so that she doesn't have to talk to the limo driver? That also came from your life?
Right, and this will be, perfect to tell you guys because as, fellow comics, that idea came from all my years on the road. I always had, a car service guy take me to the airport, and it would always be at 6 a.m. when you just rolled out of bed, and I'd get chatty Kathy, who couldn't stop with how's it going this morning? What are you feeling? Who wouldn't stop talking, and whatever signals I would, give to would you please shut the fuck up and just drive? He would never get it, and so when I pitched that, it was great because, Elaine pretends she's deaf so that the car service guy won't talk to her. I mean, obviously, I never did that, but it's something that I always wanted to do.
Now, when you were submitting material to Jerry and Larry, did Jerry ever say to you, "No, that's a terrible idea. You suck, and I never want to talk to you again. You have no talent."
It was a little subtler than that. It was really more if you could, if they weren't responding to your ideas and you could just kind of feel like, oh, I've been in this office a long time and it's getting near lunch and this is not good, nothing's landing. I write a lot in my book about how Jerry and Larry, for two guys who also were just stand-up comics before that experience, they were also remarkably good bosses. I mean, they really knew how to run the show well. They were very diplomatic. The thing I loved about Larry as kind of, more of the boss in terms of show things while Jerry was on stage rehearsing was he was always a straight shooter. And his personality is very much like that, but he was always really diplomatic. There were so many actors who came on the show who would be at the read-through and they weren't landing at the read-through, and they had to be fired. And, most showrunners are just big pussies, and they get someone else to do it, and the person is gone, and it's terrible. And Larry was always the kind of guy, if they had to fire someone, he would insist on it being him, just to be a nice guy and just say, hey, look, it's not anything personal. It's just kind of not working. I'll try to get you back on the show with something else. And I always really admired that about him.
You forget that Gilbert worked with Larry on a pilot.
Oh my God!
Norman's
That's right.
Corner.
Yes.
And to show you how bad this show
We
was.
all forgot, really.
Yeah. How awful this show turned out is that when they were pitching Seinfeld, and I think Seinfeld said, well, it's going to be written by Larry David. And they said, isn't he the one that wrote that piece of shit for Gilbert Gottfried?
Oh, my God. Now, wait a second. What network was that for,
It was,
Norman?
I think, Showtime or something.
Wasn't it
Oh.
Cinemax?
Oh, Cinemax.
Was it
Cinemax.
a
Yeah.
Cinemax?
You know better than I
Was
do.
it a Cinemax comedy experiment?
Cinemax?
Yes, it
Yeah.
was one of those
Was
experiments.
there
that-
nudity involved in it?
Yeah, there was some nudity. Yeah.
They would call a backdoor pilot.
Gilbert-
Talk about a double meaning.
Gilbert wore a merkin. I
Oh,
remember
my God,
it.
that's right.
He played a Manhattan newsstand owner. Was that was the
Yes,
premise? Yeah.
yes.
And you shot the pilot, or you didn't shoot it?
Oh, we shot it, but like I said, they called it a backdoor pilot, meaning
Right.
it was a special that was like secretly like we'd like it to be a show.
Oh, my God. And who directed it? Do you remember?
Oh God, I forget the director's
Robert
name.
Wise, I think.
Oh yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
Oh,
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
I think David Lean.
David Lean.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Carol, let's.
Ang Lee.
It was Ang Lee. Let's talk for just a second about a couple of the great iconic episodes you wrote. The Understudy with Bette Midler, and we talked about The Lip Reader, and my personal favorite episode, I think, the Hamptons episode with the ugly baby. And
The Hamptons, The Ugly Baby, yes,
Yeah.
which was written with the great Peter Melman.
Peter Melman. And
Yeah,
the
that
rye
really. I think the Ugly Baby idea, pretty positive, was Peter Melman's,
bread. Uh-huh.
and then the shrinkage thing came up. I think that was a Larry David thing. So what was so great about working on the show was all of the the synergy of so many creative, amazing people that every episode became 10 times more than it started out to be because of all these amazing writers that I worked with. So I look back on the Hamptons and I always laugh, particularly at one line, because Larry especially never liked pop culture references. I mean, I knew that if you put that in a script, it would pretty much be guaranteed to be gone in the final
interesting.
draft. And I remember Julia came out wearing this big, blousy, unattractive sundress, and Jerry has this line, he says, "And then there's Maude."
I remember that.
Yeah, and I was so happy that Larry never took that out because normally it would have gone. But whenever I watched the episode, I'm always like, thank you, Larry, for keeping that line.
It's so funny because so many things are. I mean, well, look at Murphy Brown. You couldn't watch one episode of that now.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
because of the references.
It was just
pop culture
constant
references.
pop culture references. And then, I remember they did, actually, and it's funny because it's Seinfeld, they redid the Sunshine Boys with Peter Falk and
Woody Allen.
Allen.
Yeah.
And they threw in a reference where he goes, well, I'm going to go home and watch Seinfeld.
I love it.
Oh, I don't really.
Yeah.
I don't remember that. Wow.
Yeah.
There's a scene in The Fortune Cookie, the Billy Wilder movie, when the guy that's spying on Jack Lemmon says, "Okay, I'm going to go home and watch Batman," which was a big cultural
Yeah.
reference in 1966.
And they redid The Man That Came to Dinner and they for TV, and they threw in a reference to Dan Quayle. So it's
Yeah.
a year or two later, people are going, well, what is that?
So,
Yeah.
Carol,
Right.
tell us your favorite Seinfeld episode that you wrote and your favorite episode that you didn't write, because I'm curious.
Well, I really probably would have to say The Rye is probably my favorite
It's a great
Seinfeld episode. mostly because, too, when we shot it, they'd never spent, I think they spent $1 million on the episode, which probably in terms of TV production today is not a lot, but it was like a big deal back then, and we shot it at Paramount lot, to do the snow and the handsome cab
right. And
all that kind of stuff.
Beefarino.
The Beefarino, which, I have a couple of stories about that because it has a big storyline in the Rye about Price, what was then called Price Club, which is now Costco, but, I'm still a devoted fan. I love it. And about how you buy too much and there's, you're always left with so much left over. And it always made me laugh, that giant can you could buy of beefaroni, and then we wanted to use that with Kramer feeds, the beefaroni to his horse, Rusty, which is my horse at camp. But anyway, so Chef Boyardee wouldn't let us use beefaroni, so they made us change it to beefarino.
Hilarious.
And the prop guy gave me that big can as a souvenir when we wrapped shooting, which I kept so proudly until I moved, and a mover thought it was an empty can and threw it out.
It broke my heart to read that in the book.
I know. That was really a super drag. But I would say that that's probably my favorite episode. And I know it's one of Jerry's favorites, so that means a lot to me. And I think of the ones that I didn't write that I admire. I mean, and he won an Emmy for it, I think deservedly so. Larry writing the contest, the masturbation episode. I mean, there's nothing as brilliant as that. It holds up today like anything else. And, it was so edgy and so amazing when that aired. And that to this day, it still never says masturbation in it, the word masturbation or anything like that it's so clever and so real. And it really, I think, summarizes the brilliance of Larry David. I mean, I really can't say enough about how much I respect, his talent and what a great person he is.
That shot of Kramer coming in and just slamming the money down and saying, "I'm out." Just absolutely wonderful. My memory of that is that was the episode that sort of, I could be wrong about this. I mean, the show was ascendant, but that was the episode that really turned it up a notch.
Yeah, I wasn't there then, but
popularity.
I think it was kind of cumulative. I remember Jerry sending me, I would say emails, but they weren't around then, just saying, like, I've noticed people in the Village Voice are talking about Seinfeld, like, in comments, like, it still had people that were taking to it and were seeing, that it was different and funny, even though it wasn't tearing up the ratings. People were liking it. And I think, I said it earlier, but it's amazing that the show stayed on, because if it were today, it really would have gotten a quick chance and then it'd be out.
Well, it's
no
kind
matter
of
who
like
liked it.
with movies that changed too. There used to be these little movies that would be out for a certain amount of weeks, and then they would build and become blockbusters.
Yeah, exactly.
Now in the opening night, they go, okay, didn't make any money, get rid of it.
Or they don't even get released at all. They go to DVD, or they go to, now, I guess, Netflix or.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then you went from Seinfeld to another television show that Gilbert and I love, The Larry Sanders Show. And that was a different experience altogether, because if I'm not mistaken, it was your first writer's room?
Yeah, it was my first kind of classic sitcom writer's room where, and it's really the way that I kind of still like to work today, where writers kind of write their own drafts, and then that goes to the writer's room, and then everybody kind of rewrites it together, after a table read, which is always fair, like what worked and what didn't work. And I think that, really showed me kind of the style of sitcom writing that I like now. I mean, it's funny, when I've worked on sitcoms, you can always tell the comics who became writers versus the writers, because if we're filming live and a joke doesn't work, all the comics who are writers are immediately like, well, great, we'll come up with a few different, choices because it didn't work, where writers can be more precious about it, like, oh, well, we'll sweeten it, in post and all that kind of thing. Whereas the comics are like, if it didn't work with the audience, we're not keeping it. We're going to come up with something else.
I experience that when I'm on a show and they'll have a joke in the script and I say it and it doesn't get a laugh and they go, well, you can make it funny.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and it's like, I kind of already did that. Yeah. I tried, and it didn't work. So, yeah, what's the plan B?
Can you tell us real quickly about opening for Frank Sinatra, Carol?
Oh, my God, opening for Frank Sinatra. That really, as long as I've been around, and I can say that because Gilbert, you might be the person who's been around longer than me. That still is like the high point of all my years in show business because, I really, I was having a really tough time during that, as a stand-up. I was getting really shitty gigs. I wasn't doing great. I got this big come on by this new agent who was like, I'm going to get you 3 times the money you're making now, much better clubs, come over and work with me and it's going to be blue skies, the whole song and dance. And like cut to 6 months later and he's literally booking me at ground round comedy nights on the Jersey Turnpike. Like it was horrible. And you're trying to do comedy and you're hearing squashed peanut shells on the floor. And I kept saying to this guy, like, where are my great gigs? Where's all the stuff you promised me? And he was like, I'm working on Frank, and I'm like, Frank? Like, what, Frank Stallone? Because, like, what is going on here? And lo and behold, like, I get a call. I was working on a cruise ship. And, in those days, if you were working on a cruise ship, one of your parents croaked or your house burnt down. And it was my agent going, I got you opening for Frank Sinatra. He had some weird, strange connection to Jilly Rizzo, who was, Frank Sinatra's manager. And I got to open for him. And it really is such a highlight of my life because not only was the crowd amazing and great, but he was such a gentleman. Frank Sinatra was like the classiest, nicest guy. He would bring me out for a bow after my set, which, at that time, a lot of celebrities wouldn't even put their opening act on the marquee. I mean, I know this happened to Bill Maher. I won't say who the celebrity was, but her talent is supreme.
Oh, okay.
Nice touch.
So there you go.
You had a good experience.
And I'll just throw out 2 names, and then we'll let you go. And that's you worked with Bob Hope and Milton Berle.
Yes, I did. On Bob Hope had one of his young comedian specials on NBC, and he put me on. I was on the show, but it was very sad because it was really, a little past, I think, where Bob Hope should have been performing because they said, come up with something at the end that, a line where a joke you can do with Bob. So at the time, I was doing a joke that was like, things are going great. I just made a 3-picture deal, 2 8x10s and 1 wallet size, with Photomat or whatever. And I did the joke, and Bob Hope turned to me and said, well, good for you. Like not getting it at all. I was like, oh.
Didn't you keep the cue cards as a souvenir from the Bob Hope
I do
experience?
have those cue cards, yes.
That's
I'm looking
wonderful.
at them right now.
That's wonderful.
But anyway, this was so much fun. Go, please tell all of your loyal listeners to get my book, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Crying. All these stories and more.
Lessons from a Life in Comedy, Carol Leifer.
Yes.
And Carol, we'll have you back another time, and we'll talk about all the stuff we didn't get to.
Like I'd love it.
Soupy Sales and the Oscars and Jay Leno and tonight Carson and everything else. And Dave Boone, and he says hello, by the way.
Love Dave
Our
Boone.
mutual friend. So
Yes.
thanks for doing it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Well, I'm Gilbert Gottfried. I'm here with my co-host, Frank Santopadre. And this has been another episode of Gilbert Gottfried's Amazing Colossal Podcast, where we've been talking to acclaimed television writer and comedian and the author of the new book, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Crying, Lessons from a Life in Comedy, Carol Leifer.